Live and direct, live and I take no jive.
Legalize it.
So how much can a koala bear? Koala bear, koala bear. Koala bear. Barry pulls a joint out of his pocket. Bill says, "Great, Barry, a reefer."
Hi, welcome back to the Koala podcast. And for the first time ever, we're going to Georgia. And I'm speaking to a lawyer there, Tom Church, who has done a couple of big cases. I'm aware of a Delta 8 THC case that is his most recent case. But he says he's done a couple of other ones as well, just so we can get a sense of what is actually happening in Georgia. And Tom said in the preamble when we were just talking that law enforcement are pretty hardcore in Georgia. So it'd be interesting to know what that means and what's happening in the legislature about managing those issues, if anything at all. Tom, welcome to the show. Thank you for taking time late at night to talk to us here at the Koala podcast. Maybe firstly, a bit of background about you and your firm. Are you a criminal law firm, and is that how you got into it?
Yeah, well, Sean, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. And I love to talk about this because I know that there's a lot of folks in the cannabis industry who want to do their best to comply with the law. And so it's really important for folks to know what's going on.
And it's about to get worse, I fear.
Yeah, and Georgia, unfortunately, is unfortunately notorious for being one of the harshest states when it comes to police and cannabis. They do not like cannabis, even legal hemp, right? And what I mean by that is, to my knowledge, Georgia is one of the states that has the highest rate of police conducting raids and arrests of vape store owners, smoke shop owners who sell these legal hemp products, right? And we're talking everything from CBD gummies to THCA flower, right? Now, Georgia has had recent legislation, but that hasn't stopped the raids. And so my firm is predominantly a criminal defense firm, right? We do mostly high stakes felonies and federal work, but we got into the hemp industry through those kinds of cases. We represent a mom and pop, for example, that was one of the first stores raided in Georgia based just on selling Delta 8, right? But what I think kind of put us on the map in the hemp world is a case that we brought against a district attorney in a metro Atlanta county who had issued a press release saying she was going to go after all the businesses that sell Delta 8 or Delta 10 THC. This was back in 2022 when those products were really coming up in the market. And she issued that press release. We were retained by a few different distributors, and we represented retail stores and actually got an injunction from a court against the district attorney, preventing her from conducting any raids. There had already been a couple raids.
I mean, what's the legal situation of Delta 8 in Georgia? I mean, was it another one of those loophole things that like most of the legislators throughout the country, and it got loose, so to speak?
So actually, for up until very recently, Georgia has had the same exact definition of hemp as the federal farm bill, which is any part of the cannabis plant or its derivatives or its extracts or its isomers that have less than 0.3% Delta 9 THC is hemp and therefore exempted from the Controlled Substances Act, right? So for Delta 8, to me, if you read just the language, it says any extract except for Delta 9 THC over 0.3. That would indicate Delta 8 and Delta 10 and HHC and CBD and CBG. All these things are legal now, right? Yeah. But that didn't stop police from going after business owners, right? We had the case against the district attorney. Then up in rural Northwest Georgia, a sheriff did the same thing, issued press release. We got an injunction against him. We represented a bunch of different stores and, helped people get their property back and get charges dismissed after having to basically explain to the prosecutors, you can't win this case. We have an expert who's going to be able to tell the judge and the jury, these are these things called cannabinoids, and they're different from each other. And Delta 8 THC is not the same as Delta 9 THC. That all culminated late in 2023 with a Court of Appeals opinion that held for the first time in Georgia that Delta 8 is legal hemp, right? Delta 8 products and Delta 10 products, basically just restating the law. But it took
Yeah.
that to get up, had to go up to the Court of Appeals to get that kind of public service announcement. Unfortunately, that hasn't stopped the raids either, right?
And
So
just a quick, do you think the raids are happening on the behest of a certain sheriff's department, or it's coming from further up?
no,
Georgia has a
yeah.
history of these sorts of things and a whole range of different topics. So it's the law according to me, a la Dukes of Hazzard.
Yes. Sheriffs are extremely powerful in Georgia, legally and politically. And there are some sheriffs that do not like cannabis. Up in Northwest Georgia, there's a judge or a sheriff that was quoted in High Times once upon a time saying over his dead body, right? Is marijuana going to be something that he allows? And we got an injunction against him. So that was, I asked him, he was cross-examined, and I asked him, he was saying that there was a cannabis leaf and that was marijuana. I said, well, couldn't it be hemp? And he said, potato, patata, which just kind of shows kind of the ignorance we're working with, right? But, so far the courts have been on our side. Now, what happened last year, which I think is relevant for any state that has hemp products, right, is the Georgia legislature has closed that loophole that allowed what we call THCA flower, right, which is because it says Delta 9 THC, that is a different substance, a different cannabinoid than THCA, right? Delta 9 THCA. So basically you had legal pot here in Georgia for a little while.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're seeing that loophole closed. We're seeing very aggressive, we just talked about the sheriffs have been the ones bringing these cases. Now we've been retained in some cases that involve the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. So we are now seeing a more concerted statewide effort. But, it's remarkable to me that since the very beginning that the Farm Bill was passed, it's been unambiguous that a lot of these products are just straight up legal. I'm talking about like CBD flower, right? There's no THC in that. But that hasn't stopped. There's been dozens of these raids with mom and pops, people without criminal histories who are literally charged under the same statutes that are brought against shady drug dealers in the back alleys. Right?
I mean, this is the funny thing about this, because the other person who's become very vocal on this, and I'm speaking to again later in the week, is Rod Kite out of North Carolina. And it seems these states shoot themselves in the foot because they turn illegal production of Delta 8, 10s, 11, all these things into a rights issue, which it rightly becomes because of their reaction to managing how they deal with it. And it seems that part of the world, they're just completely blind to understanding how to manage this issue in a grown-up and sensible way.
So Rod is great. I've learned a lot from him. What I can say is to respond to what you're addressing is the media and the people, quote unquote, have been on our side consistently in all of these cases. And I've represented vape store and smoke shop owners from Northwest Georgia to Southeast Georgia, right? Every corner in the rural and metro Atlanta. And in each case where there's any kind of publicity, right? Even if it's a press release from the sheriff's office, the comments are overwhelmingly, even for people who aren't hippies or potheads, right? They're like, why are our tax dollars being spent on this, right? Don't we have bigger fish to fry? Don't we have an opioid crisis? And then, of course,
don't you have Atlanta Airport, which shovels through more drugs to the rest of the US than any other airport in the US? It just seems almost crazy. But do they think that by knocking this head on the head, they're going to solve other problems, or you just don't know their thinking?
It's hard. I think it's case by case, right? And let's also just, zero in on the fact that there's a lot of money in this industry, right? These stores have a lot of cash, they have a lot of money. And now we're seeing a disturbing trend of law enforcement freezing bank accounts and seizing hundreds of thousands of dollars from these business owners and basically saying, oh, because you sold these, okay, let's assume that some of these products, THCA flower, that is technically marijuana, because you are selling this non-compliant hemp product, because that's what it is at this point. Whether it's marijuana, it's non-compliant hemp product because it's over the limit, right? We can seize all of your assets, We can take your company vehicle. We can take your store. I've literally had a case where they tried to take the underlying real estate that a store was situated on. Now, fortunately, we have had every criminal case dismissed so far, or that's what we're aiming towards. We have not taken a plea deal in any of these cases, right? We haven't lost, our property to the state. We have succeeded in all the forfeiture proceedings so far. But it's tough in every case, and you have a hostile audience. But I think that if these cases ever got to a trial, right, with 12 jurors, people of the community, I'm very confident that all of these clients, no matter their situation, would have a very strong defense. Because even in marijuana cases, juries are a lot more skeptical of prosecutors and police officers when it comes to marijuana. They just don't see it as the bugaboo that it was, right, 20 years ago.
What does this mean in terms of what's happening in the legislature? Are they watching these cases? Are there people on either side of the house thinking, okay, I want to make this easier for the business owners, or on the other side of the house, I want to make this harder for the business owners?
So last year they passed a landmark bill for the hemp industry that for the first time it created a lot of regulations and brought it all under the umbrella of the Department of Agriculture. That's why earlier I referred to this stuff as non-compliant hemp products, because now if you have stuff that has too much THC in it, it's a violation of these hemp regulations. And this bill does a lot of other things. It creates packaging requirements, labeling requirements. It makes you you have to get a license if you want to be a retailer or a wholesaler or a manufacturer. So there is at least some baseline level of acceptance that this is a very profitable industry and that we need to regulate it, not
regulate it.
Yeah. But that said, this bill also did land some blows in the hemp industry. Like I said, it got rid of THCA flower. Actually, no flower products are allowed now. So you can't even have CBD flower in Georgia. My theory on that
is crazy, because then then a whole lot of black market products come in representing legal products, and they're designed to be gobbled like children gobble candy. Whereas if you had flower, it's an obvious adult product, isn't it? I mean, that's just inverted thinking.
Well, Sean, here's the thing. If a police officer smells marijuana in your car,
it's easier to get.
It's probable cause.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, if we're all in agreement that there are legal products that smell like marijuana, they don't have a right to search the vehicle. And goodbye to a lot of these cases they're bringing now where they find drugs in the car, right? Even where there's no marijuana in the car, these searches have been upheld because a police officer's claims they smelled marijuana, right? So there's a lot of interest and stakeholders here. The Sheriff's Association is vigorously opposed to further normalization of cannabis. We are seeing some bills in the legislature so far that would create more of a barrier between businesses that sell booze and businesses that sell hemp, right? I think it's important for any listener to know that Congress right now, talking at the federal level, they have to pass a new farm bill. They might get one more extension, but
that's an ongoing discussion, very long time, isn't it?
Right. And then there was a recent amendment that I know would have gone after what people are calling intoxicating hemp, right? I've seen some litigation at the federal level that, the first court that came out saying that Delta 8 was legal was the Ninth Circuit out in California. But I haven't seen any kind of nationwide effort. I don't know if you could really have a nationwide case, right? Because the hemp regs are different among the states. And then you have states that have legal marijuana and it's completely different. So Georgia, though, continues to be a state where it is just inherently risky to do business in cannabis, right? And hopefully that's going to change. But even with the Department of Agriculture now being in charge, we have the Georgia Bureau of Investigation kind of going on their own, right? Kind of lone wolf, rogue agent kind of going out and, going after these businesses, even though the Department of Agriculture is supposed to be regulating it as a civil matter. So, the future is kind of uncertain here in Georgia, but it's always been risky.
Yeah. I mean, both marijuana and these hemp-based products are out of the bag throughout the entire country. How does a state, I mean, this is interesting because I know nothing about Georgia, but I've never spoken about Mississippi, Louisiana, or Tennessee, who probably have, fairly similar approaches. You can't protect yourself from reality, and all you're doing is growing the black market, which means a harder social management of the issue in the first place. I mean, do they just not care about that due to power and politics?
Well, Georgia is a conservative state, not by a ton, but there is a Republican majority. Actually, it's almost a 50-50 state when it comes to voters, but the legislature, due to the way they draw the districts,
Yeah,
is heavily Republican,
Mhm.
almost super majority. Now, you do have a lot of Republicans that are business people, right? And they want to promote businesses. And at this point, you also have a lot of them that are tied up with agriculture interests. And there is a decent amount of hemp farming in Georgia. So there is, I can tell you there's this really conservative senator from my neck of the woods, Columbus, Georgia, who hates cannabis. And he gave a speech sponsoring this latest bill, which, even though it does some bad things, it does create a lot of normalization for THC products that are conforming. And he said, in his speech, now y'all know me, y'all know how much I hate this plant, but the train has left the station. We need to regulate
Reality has hit.
Yeah. Reality's hit at least some folks. Again, the police officers have been resistant so far, but a lot of legislatures get it. And I'll tell you just a quick funny story. When I brought that lawsuit against the sheriff in Northwest Georgia, I knew it would be hard for an Atlanta attorney, a quote unquote city lawyer, to come up there and tell them what to do. Right. So I actually called a former state senator from that area. He was current at the time. And he testified, he got on the stand and without my prompting, volunteered that he eats Delta 8 gummies because they help him sleep. That he hadn't been able to sleep. He holds up his finger. He's got it in a splint. And he goes, took some from my finger before this hearing. And I think really only because of him, we got the injunction because it was a politics thing, not a law thing.
Now, I've got another question, which is, a US-wide question, but I imagine it sort of concentrates the conversation in Georgia. In the US, because it's easy to make money out of hemp for human consumption, the most important conversation about hemp, industrial hemp, has been sort of sidelined in the conversation, and industrial hemp can solve a lot of issues, agricultural and industrial and building, and I'm not a great fan of the way that Australia has structured what it's done, but it's been very clever about industrial hemp and very quietly is going to be a world leader in it. Not so long down the line. And, I know that people like, what's his name in Kentucky? Sorry, the senator who's just retired. McConnell, sorry. Sometimes my memory of which senator where. Sure. McConnell, was actually, he actually, in that first Trump administration, had a very, of course there was politics and there was money involved, but they had a very sensible approach to trying to create that distinction so that Kentucky had a really good industrial hemp program. I don't know what it's like now. I mean, what are your thoughts in a state like Georgia, which, as you say, there is the inklings of an industry that can be, very wealth making for the state and also just a positive thing. I mean, is it completely lost in this conversation?
Well, like I said, there is a decent amount of hemp farming in Georgia, but you're also going to have to go against tobacco and peanuts and cotton, especially cotton, right, where hemp can be a substitute. Well, I think, it's funny because a lot of senators and legislators have said that when they legalized hemp, they thought they were legalizing hemp rope and hemp shirts and hemp shoes. They didn't know about all these cannabinoids. And I think a lot, even a lot of more sophisticated folks didn't, right? And now that's kind of what the industry is. I think it would be great to have more, use of hemp and for the industry, for hemp to be broader, not just consumable hemp products, right? But we'll see. Like you said, there's a lot of special interests, right? And especially in a state like Georgia, where there's a lot of other crops that want their say. But it's certainly not as problematic from a legal standpoint when it comes to risk and business. If you want to get in the hemp industry, it's way less risky to make hemp shirts and sell hemp shirts than it is to sell Delta 8 gummies, right? The cops don't care about the rope. They care about the dope.
Yeah, of course. And I mean, while we're on the topic, I'll ask you about something about the practice in a second, but I mean, regulated cannabis or marijuana as they like to call it in the legislature. I mean, is that just a no-hoper in Georgia for the foreseeable future? What's medical doing at the moment in Georgia?
So in Georgia, that's a good distinction because, like I said, flower is prohibited for sale as hemp, right? Hemp flower, like CBD flower, Delta 8 flower. THC over 0.3% is only legal in Georgia. Their medical marijuana, quote unquote, law here is just what they call low THC oil.
Yeah.
And it's really limited in the kind of patients that I think can benefit from it. It's basically people who suffer seizures or have, these kind of hardcore. That's how it started.
The 2017-18 conversations, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, exactly. So you have low THC oil and then hemp. As for legal marijuana recreational, it's a lot more foreseeable than it was 10 years ago. I can see it happening within 10 years, probably not within 5. But Georgia is, demographics are changing and politics are changing, I'm not a supporter of President Trump, but I think he's the kind of Republican because he's not really a Republican, doesn't really believe
he's
anything.
not really in anything, is he?
I think he's the one who, and remember the Farm Bill passed under him.
Yeah.
They also got some significant criminal justice reforms passed under him. So I don't think he really cares. And he's kind of a, quote unquote businessman.
Yeah.
Who I think there's, we've seen some movement at the federal level, right? With reclassifying marijuana as Schedule 3. Generally speaking, every state follows that. So in theory, when that happens, if it's still going to happen, unless, Trump decides he doesn't want to do it, right? He might call it back.
As the conversations I've had is he's going to wake up one morning and decide either one way or the other, and then 3 days later decide the other way, probably because that's how he operates, really, isn't it?
Depends who whispers in his ear, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, let's say though that the reclassification to Schedule 3 proceeds as it's on track to do. Then in theory, Georgia will follow suit, as will almost every other state, right? And now we won't have Schedule 1 trafficking charges, right? It'll be reduced charges. There's still going to be criminal charges though. So at that point though, I think something like declassification or reclassification, that could be maybe the push that Georgia needs to at least get medical or something like that, right? But again, you have these different special interests, and the Sheriff's Association in Georgia is one of the most powerful lobbying, one of the most powerful lobbies in the state. And, most of the sheriffs hate cannabis, which is, and most of it's outside of Metro Atlanta too.
Of course.
159 counties, 159 sheriffs. So 159 different opinions on cannabis.
Your practice just seems as though it's going to be getting more and more work. Are you opening up a cannabis division soon?
Well, I actually testified in front of a Senate subcommittee last year about their new bill they were passing. And I just wanted to bring it to their attention. Like, there are a lot of raids. We've gotten a lot of media coverage for some of them, but not all of them. And I thought it was really important that these senators know, like, there are a ton of people getting arrested, dragged out in their homes in front of their kids in handcuffs, people who have no interaction with the legal system, right? So I actually said, I understand this is good for business, but I would rather these raids to stop. And, we don't depend on hemp cases at all in our firm. Like I said, we do a lot of federal work and serious felonies all over the state. But, the hemp cases are definitely interesting, but intellectually challenging, fascinating. We learn so much in these cases, but it's not worth the human cost.
And do you think that, if they build up on this sort of enforcement attitude, in the end, it's going to cost the government more money because there's going to be more civil cases?
It's going to keep costing them if they keep losing the forfeiture hearings, right? Like I said, they try to take all the money and then we end up beating them in court and getting the money back. So far, I don't think it's been very lucrative for them. But, that's where you have the business interests and hopefully the politicians that recognize the business interests versus the ideologues, right? And as long as there are folks out there that still see marijuana as this, this gateway drug, this, evil kind of thing, then you're going to have these conservative opinions and kind of tough on crime approaches to it, right? Even where, again, in Georgia, in theory, the Department of Agriculture is supposed to deal with cannabis products now.
Yeah.
So they're supposed to now be the ones policing products that might qualify as marijuana because they're over the limit. But we still see law enforcement asserting itself because they got a lot at stake. Again, the smell of cannabis, even if it's CBD flower, that could be probable cause to search a vehicle as long as flower is prohibited here. So it'll be interesting to see what the legislature does on this next go round.
I've got sort of just one more sort of wider question because, talking about cannabis for me for the last 10 years has started making me think more about how you regulate all the other illegal compounds, drugs. You're a criminal lawyer, serious felonies. I presume 80% of your work has some sort of drug relationship. I mean, does that lead you to think that, although they see cannabis as the sort of, the dangerous lead in to change, that's the only thing that can happen over time in the US, especially with regard to things like fentanyl and cocaine, is somehow to regulate these things and turn them into a health solution rather than a criminal solution. I mean, just the general thoughts is that ever going to happen? I mean, since this new administration has come in, we've seen hints that, it goes back, we're going back to Reagan. We're going to sort out those Colombians and those Mexicans who are all far more sophisticated now and just almost laugh in their responses, seeing some of the responses coming back from that part of the world. Is you created this market, you in a way you created the sort of devil that rose up. How you deal with this every day? How is it just gonna stay in this sort of permanent stasis where various political issues just are going to, as you say, the Sheriff's Association, they're just going to play this game forever? Or at some point, are people going to say, we really need to think about this a little bit harder?
So I hate to give you the most lawyerly answer in the world, which is it depends. And I think it depends on the type of drug that we're talking about. I think cannabis is going one way. But things like fentanyl and methamphetamine are going the other. As the opioid crisis has, gone through these communities, a lot of people have actually used hemp products and cannabis products to wean themselves off some of these more dangerous addictive drugs.
Yeah, as a sort of medical sort of approach.
And in our cases, we've had witnesses who've testified about that, how it's helped them. Right. So cannabis is going one way with a lot more acceptance in these, communities that used to be really against it. Cause I mean, it's at least better than the other stuff on the street. Right. And then though, again, with the fentanyl, the methamphetamine, I can tell you that methamphetamine compared to 20 years ago, back before that, back then it was being made in trailers with really low purity. Now it's being made in labs in other countries and being shipped here at 100% purity. The fentanyl is a chemical, obviously, so you can make that in a lab as potent as you want to. So I see a lot more cracking down on those kind of drugs and trafficking, especially. I think, it's interesting because Trump's base is the base that is having a lot of these issues with a lot of these drugs. And so I think there might, hopefully, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but there might be some empathy for people who are, addicts, right? As